looking at the mathematical relationships and where there is a link between these two particular graphs. Okay? So, to start off with, we can see our average cost falling and our marginal cost falling at a steeper rate. What economic piece of study and analysis have you done that would associate or link these two things as to why average costs would fall, or why you would start to see this increase in marginal physical product of workers?
Because of like the, I can't think of the term now, but where you work more, your productive potential goes down.
Okay. What theorist talks about that with individual workers?
Was it Smith?
Right, what did Adam Smith talk about?
Was it to do with like, it was a bit related to the division of labour, of how by like focusing on one task,
Yeah.
you can only do that for like so much before your like utility and drops, doesn't it?
Not
Not
utilities,
utility, but your
how do you measure output?
marginal, revenue product.
Okay, but we've taken out the revenue part and we're just looking at the idea of marginal physical product. So if you imagine in this diagram, as we start to add additional workers, each worker becomes more productive. What was Adam Smith's way of setting up workers? Division of labour. Okay, so you repeat the task, you become better at it. What does it also allow you to give the workers? Specialist equipment, and then they don't have to move around. So in my subway, bread person, lettuce person, meat person, sauce person, money person, they're not moving anywhere, they're not taking on and off gloves. Bread person's got that knife. So each worker makes the whole team work more efficiently. So as I add the worker, they become more productive than the next person. And therefore, my average output will also rise as well. Why is average output rising at a slower rate than my marginal physical product? What does average take account of? So marginal physical product takes account of how many workers? So each one worker is the marginal. The average takes account of whom? All of them. So my second worker has got faster, but my average is also including which worker? The first as well. So can you understand where the average would be below the marginal? Yeah, the third worker becomes even quicker, which pulls the average up. Okay, until you get to a point here where you add additional workers, and actually that worker is less productive than the worker that came before. Why would that happen?
Not enough tasks to fulfill.
Okay, possibly not enough tasks. So if I think about the idea of being in that subway, even though I've got a massive queue of people, what's the problem with that worker? What can they not do?
I can't make it go any quicker.
Why can't they make it go any quicker? What is there not enough of?
Not enough like capital.
Right, excellent. In what sense?
Like there's only one place you can go to get your sandwich and all that sort of thing.
Right, okay. So they're like, I've got bread in the oven, unless I've got another oven, I've got to wait for that bread to be cooked. And then it's going to start to get a bit of a backlog. So there might be then workers that start to become idle. When those workers become idle, so here, we start to get that drop off on marginal physical product, the output then starts to slow. Okay, we can start to see that curve becoming at a lower gradient. Why doesn't it suddenly drop off? Even though that worker's output is dropping, what might that worker still be compared to those earlier workers? Say that again? But look at their output compared to those first workers. It is still what?
More than the workers previously.
Yes, it's still more than worker 1 or 2. So the average will start to tail off, but it might still be increasing because I've got those lower workers very early on. Until you get to a point actually where additional workers will call that average to actually start to fall. Think about the idea of like, I always think about cricket. Remember when you bring in like the lower order? Well, they're going to score like 1 or 2 runs or just go out for a duck. When they're out, the average suddenly drops because I'm bringing in another worker, they're not adding any output, but I've now got to divide the average by an additional person. So at that point, average will start to fall. And hopefully you can see roughly in your graph, it kind of hits it at what point? Where does that marginal physical product intersect the average? At the peak, yeah, or very close to it. There might be a little bit of a dissimilary because we're not dealing with the specifics of like decimal places, but it hits it roughly at the peak. Right, how does that come over here into my cost diagrams? Why would the output of workers impact costs? What do workers have to receive? Wages. So at the start, if we think about the idea of the average cost, it's the average cost of what? Not the average cost of the worker, but the average cost of
The cost of making it.
so the output. So my first worker makes like 3 units. So imagine I pay someone £5, they make 5 units. The average cost will be £1, yeah? So I then bring in another worker. To combined, they're able to increase the output to 20 units. Well, they're both still getting paid a £5, so what would be now the average cost? 2 workers, so each paid £5, what's that in total? £10, and they produce 20 units of output. Say it again? 50p. Can you see how that average cost will fall? Okay? And if you imagine it in reference to marginal cost will fall even quicker, because marginal cost is that change for each additional unit. And that additional unit will be accelerated because it's associated to the marginal physical product. Because that final 20th unit that was really quick to make, so therefore would be really cheap, drops at a faster rate. At some point though, output starts to fall, because what will start to happen to the workers? Average cost will start to fall, and then it starts to no longer fall and kind of become constant. Why? What's happening with the workers?
A level that they can work out consistently.
Right, in terms of a level that they can work at, when we say consistently, we are referring to working at their productive potential as quick as they can, as fast as they can, because as James mentioned, we've got limited capital. Now I'm starting to get that queue for the toaster machine. I've only got that one knife. I'm waiting to borrow equipment. So at some point you get that kind of constant aspect. And then worst case scenario, you start to add additional workers, and you see here where that average starts to fall. So then I add another worker. If they bring less to it, what's going to then start to happen to their wages and their costs? Why will the costs start to go up? What will happen to that £5 that I'm paying that worker? Right, they're producing less than the previous workers. So that £5 is going to have to be spread over all of the output. So it's now going to make everything previously a little bit more expensive. So therefore the average cost will start to rise. And what can we see special about, again, similar with the mathematical relationship between the average cost and the marginal cost? Where does the marginal cost approximately intersect the average cost? Right, where it bottoms out. Okay, as part of that process. Because you'll get that acceleration as it filters through. As this starts to slow down, the reason why it's slowing down is a reflection of the idea of that fall in marginal physical product. And therefore, as that marginal cost starts to increase, because these workers are becoming less productive, marginal cost will start to rise because we've got each worker that is less productive as part of it, and then it will intersect just like this intersects here. Okay? And what you have is that relationship between your short run costs and the idea of the law of diminishing returns. Okay? So, what is the idea in economics of the short run? What do we call it? This goes back to what you said, James. What happens in the short run in economics?
Some of the factors of production are fixed.
Right, so here we've got at least one factor of production is fixed. So I'm going to assume it's capital. So if capital is fixed, yeah, if you like it, if capital is fixed, what is going to be the variable? Labour. Okay, so if you imagine, if we bring those two diagrams together, here we've got the idea of quantity of labour, because that's going to be my variable factor of production. Here's my idea of output. We know that workers, the marginal physical product of workers, will at first rise, and at some point it will then begin to fall. Marginal physical product. Okay? So we know that marginal physical product, as we start to increase labour, so marginal product will increase as we increase labour, according to who did we say that was based upon? Adam Smith and the division of labour. So the idea of repetition of a simple task. What else did we say we're providing our workers with? Specialist equipment, and the fact that they don't need reduces the need for movement. Okay, so that means that we can then increase productivity. At some point, however, here at Q, we start to suffer from the law of diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns. Can anyone remember what that means? What's happening? What did we say was the problem for the workers now? There wasn't enough what?
So you can only work to a certain amount, so there could be, like, in this situation, it could be a limited number of capital equipment available, or like there could be just too many workers in the building.
So at first, output rises and then output starts to fall because we have a variable factor of production that is then being limited by a fixed factor of production. So the law of diminishing returns, whereby output of each additional unit of labour will at first increase, linked to Adam Smith's division of labour, and then fall due to a fixed factor of production. Okay? Could be, it doesn't have to be necessarily capital. If you're a farmer, it could be the size of your field, i.e. land, but we'll just use that example. So what we start to know is, when it comes to the idea of average output, we said that there was a relationship where as workers become more productive, average output will increase. It will then hit a point here with the law of diminishing returns where the average will still rise because these workers here are still more productive than these earlier ones, but because they're less productive than the ones over here, output will be rising but at a slower rate. So the line will start to slow. It will then hit the marginal physical product where we then start to take account of it actually falling. So that there is my average output per worker. Okay? And there is a mathematical relationship that marries that stuff up. Okay. At that point, if we then link that to the idea here of my cost curves. So here we've got quantity of output rather than the idea of quantity of labour. Here we'll just have a numerical value. So it's going to be the idea of costs in pounds as part of that process. Okay. What can we kind of see about those graphs that makes logical sense when we think about the idea that the only real cost that is changing, so the only cost that I'll have here that would be variable potentially, would be that idea of labour. If I'm assuming all other factors of production to some extent are going to be fixed. As average output is going up, what should happen to average cost? It will decrease. Yes, so as average output is increasing, average cost will fall, but then as average output falls, average cost will rise because your wages are spread over a lower cost. Similarly here, when we think about the idea of marginal physical product, marginal cost will decrease quite rapidly. What will then happen here when we start to hit the law of diminishing returns? What will the marginal cost start doing? If workers are becoming less productive, what does it now cost to produce an additional unit of output?
Costs more.
It becomes more expensive. So at this point, marginal cost will start to rise. Okay? And we know that if we think about, and this is how I draw it, you need to have average cost that is hitting or intersecting at its lowest point because of the nature of that mathematical relationship. Okay? So over here, we know that marginal cost of output will increase once you suffer the law of diminishing returns, because you have a lower marginal physical product, you have a wage for that worker, what we used to call like the marginal cost of labour, over a lower marginal physical product. So at that point, marginal cost starts to increase. Here, we've still got a reduction in average cost. What do we call that? As you increase output, average costs fall.
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale. So we do have economies of scale, and that economies of scale, as we've mentioned, is linked to the division of labour. What did Adam Smith call that? Beginning with S. Specialisation. And the division of labour. But you will then hit a point where MC will intersect average cost at its lowest point. So whenever you draw it, those things have to intersect there, and then due to the overall impact of diminishing returns, you will then suffer what problem? What do we call it when average cost starts to rise? Excellent. And you just need to be aware of that principle. Okay? So workers are more productive, that specialisation and division of labour, that improves the average output. So what we've got is reflected. If you imagine, if I put the mirror there, what's it called when you have that symmetry but it's upside down? Reflection. Yeah, is it a reflection? It's not an inflection.
Well, I mean, if you put a mirror in between there.
It would look like that, wouldn't it? It would do that. So it would mirror that kind of aspect. So that marginal physical product increasing is causing marginal cost to fall rapidly because each additional worker is more productive, so we've got a low unit labour cost. Average output is then becoming increasingly higher due to that productivity. It starts to taper off, okay, due to the idea of the law of diminishing returns. When the law of diminishing returns becomes so significant that additional output is really unproductive, average output will actually fall, and when average output falls, average cost will actually rise, because again, if you think about it, this economies of scale, we've got the idea is that wage costs are increasing at a faster rate than the increase in output. That's the logic. Okay?